The morning sun streamed through the windows of Elite Couture, Nashville's most exclusive boutique, catching dust particles that danced in the air like tiny stars. Ashley Thompson wiped down the glass countertops with careful precision, her reflection staring back at her, honey blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, dark circles under her eyes betraying another late night of songwriting after her shift. At 24, Ashley wasn't where she had imagined she would be. The daughter of struggling Texas ranchers, she had moved to Nashville with nothing but a guitar, a notebook full of songs, and a dream. Music City, they called it. A place where country singers were made. 3 years later, she was still waiting. For her break, working retail to pay rent on a studio apartment she shared with 2 other aspiring musicians. Thompson! Trevor Blackwell's voice cut through her thoughts. The boutique manager appeared from the back room, impeccably dressed, in a charcoal Italian suit that cost more than Ashley's monthly rent. His styled hair and manicured nails screamed old money, though rumors around the store suggested he came from modest beginnings himself, a fact he seemed determined to erase from existence. "Yes, Mr. Blackwell." Ashley straightened immediately. "The Donovan party is coming in this afternoon. Mrs. Donovan specifically requested you assist her daughter with bridesmaid dresses." Trevor's eyes narrowed. "Don't mess this up. These are the kind of clients who can make or break our quarterly numbers." Ashley nodded, suppressing a sigh. Another day helping the wealthy select outfits that cost more than her entire wardrobe. But she needed this job. Her music education classes at Belmont University weren't going to pay for themselves, and her parents back in Cedar Creek couldn't offer financial support after last year's drought had devastated their small cattle operation. As Trevor disappeared into his office, Ashley reached into her pocket, feeling the familiar shape of her USB drive. It contained 6 original songs she had recorded in her friend's makeshift studio, songs about home, heartbreak, and hope. Songs inspired by the country legends she'd grown up listening to, especially George Strait, the king of country himself. If you've ever dreamed of making it big in Nashville like Ashley, now might be the perfect time to start by listening to the legends who paved the way. Their timeless wisdom could be your guide to success in music and in life. Ashley remembered the first time she heard George Strait's Amarillo by Morning. She was 7 years old, sitting on her father's lap in their old pickup truck, driving, back from a rodeo. Her father had pointed to the radio and said, "That right there, that's real country music. That man sings with his whole heart." From that moment, George Strait's music became the soundtrack to her life. She learned guitar playing his songs, cried to his ballads after her first heartbreak, and found strength in his lyrics during her toughest times. The morning passed slowly as Ashley helped various customers, wealthy wives spending their husbands' money, young professionals splurging on luxury items, and the occasional celebrity client. Elite Couture catered exclusively to Nashville's upper echelon, those who thought nothing of dropping thousands of dollars on a single outfit. For most of them, Ashley was invisible, just a pair of hands bringing them items, a voice offering compliments regardless of how the clothes actually looked. By early afternoon, the store had quieted down. Ashley was organizing a new shipment of designer ties when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up and froze, her heart skipping several beats. There, standing in the doorway in worn jeans, dusty boots, and his trademark Resistal cowboy hat, was George Strait himself. At 70 years old, the country legend had aged gracefully, with silver hair and laugh lines that spoke of a life well lived. He stood somewhat awkwardly at the entrance, looking around the opulent store with mild curiosity. Ashley couldn't move. The man whose posters had adorned her bedroom walls, whose songs had inspired her to pursue music, whose voice had comforted her through countless hardships, was standing mere feet away from her. Trevor emerged from the back room, his practiced, Smile faltering slightly as he assessed the casually dressed older man. Ashley recognized that look. It was the same one Trevor gave to anyone he deemed unworthy of Elite Couture's prestigious clientele, a look that categorized people based solely on their appearance and perceived wealth. "Can I help you, sir?" Trevor's tone was polite but cool, his gaze flicking disapprovingly over George's weathered boots. George smiled warmly, seemingly unaffected by the chilly reception. "I hope so. I'm looking for a suit for a special occasion." Trevor's eyebrow arched slightly. "I see. Well, our suits start at $5,000. Perhaps you might be more comfortable at one of the department stores downtown. They have quite reasonable options." Ashley felt her chest tighten with indignation. Did Trevor not recognize one of the most successful country artists of all time? George Strait had sold more than 100 million records worldwide, had more #1 hits than any artist in any genre, and probably owned more land in Texas than Trevor would see in his lifetime. "Actually," George responded with unhurried calm, "I'm looking for something custom. Money's not an issue." Trevor's smile remained fixed, disbelief evident in his eyes.
"Our custom suits take time, sir. They're crafted for a certain clientele. Perhaps you could tell me about this special occasion?" "It's an awards ceremony," George said simply. "Ah," Trevor nodded condescendingly. "A local affair? A retirement party, perhaps?" Ashley couldn't bear it any longer.
Her hand gripped the countertop as she watched her idol being treated like some lost country bumpkin who had wandered in by mistake. The same humble legend who had shaped country music for decades was being dismissed by a man who wouldn't know authentic country if it played him a personal concert. Just then the bell chimed again as the store's front door opened. A young couple walked in. The woman was Tiffany Donovan, daughter of real estate mogul Robert Donovan, and her fiancé. James Trevor immediately perked up. "Miss Donovan, we've been expecting you. Ashley here will assist you with the bridesmaid dresses while I just finish up with—" His voice trailed off as he glanced back at George, clearly eager to dismiss him. "I'm actually not quite finished with this gentleman," Ashley said, her voice stronger than she expected. Trevor shot her a warning look that clearly said, "Don't you dare lose the Donovan account," but some things were more important than commissions and quarterly numbers. Ashley stepped forward, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. "Mr. Blackwell," she said, loud enough for everyone in the store to hear, "do you know who this is?" Trevor's expression shifted to one of irritation. "Thompson, the Donovans are waiting." "This," Ashley continued, turning to the now curious Donovans and the other customers who had stopped to watch the unfolding scene, "is George Strait." The boutique fell silent. Tiffany Donovan's mouth formed a perfect O of surprise. Her fiancé James stepped forward, his face lighting up with recognition. "George Strait, the George Strait." James extended his hand. "Sir, it's an honor. My father and I have seen you in concert 12 times. Trevor's face drained of color as the reality of his mistake dawned on him. He had just condescendingly suggested that one of country music's greatest icons, a man worth hundreds of millions of dollars, should shop at a department store. George, for his part, accepted James's handshake with genuine warmth. 12 times. That's mighty flattering. Thank you for the support. I'm a huge fan too, Mr. Strait, Tiffany gushed. Would you mind if we took a picture together? My dad will absolutely freak out. As George graciously posed with the couple, Trevor stood frozen, his perfectly cultivated professional mask cracking with mortification. Ashley caught his eye, and for a brief moment she saw something she had never witnessed in the arrogant manager before. Pure, unadulterated panic. The next few minutes passed in a blur as word spread throughout the store. Staff members emerged from back rooms and other customers abandoned their shopping to catch a glimpse of the country legend. Through it all, George maintained his characteristic humility, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries as if he weren't being treated like royalty, a stark contrast to how he'd been received minutes earlier. When the commotion finally settled, Trevor stepped forward, his face a mask of contrition. "Mr. Strait, I must apologize for my behavior. I didn't recognize you, but that's no excuse for how I treated you. At Elite Couture, we pride ourselves on providing exceptional service to all our customers." The lie was so transparent that Ashley had to suppress a snort. Elite Couture prided itself on catering to the wealthy and famous while making everyone else feel unwelcome. She had witnessed Trevor turn away potential customers based on their appearance countless times. George regarded Trevor with calm eyes that seemed to see right through the insincere apology. Rather than call him out, however, the country star simply nodded. "No harm done, son," he said, extending his hand to Trevor. "My mama always said the character of a man isn't shown in how he treats people who can do something for him, but in how he treats those who can't do anything for him at all." The gentle rebuke hung in the air, made all the more powerful by George's kind delivery. Trevor's hand trembled slightly as he shook George's, shame coloring his cheeks. "Now," George continued, "I still need that suit. I'm being honored at the Country Music Association Awards next week, and my wife insisted I get something new instead of wearing my old standby." "Of course, Mr. Strait," Trevor stammered. "I'll personally ensure you receive our very best service. Our top designer is in today, and I'm certain we can expedite the process." "Actually," George interrupted, his gaze shifting to Ashley, who had been watching the exchange with quiet satisfaction, "I believe this young lady was about to help me before I became a distraction." All eyes turned to Ashley. Trevor's expression was a complex mixture of disbelief and warning. "But sir," Trevor protested weakly, "Miss Thompson is relatively new, and the Donovans have specifically requested—" "We don't mind waiting, Tiffany," Donovan interjected, clearly delighted to be part of the unfolding drama. "Actually, we insist. It's not every day you get to see George Strait shopping for a suit." Trevor had no choice but to concede. With a tight smile, he nodded to Ashley. "Very well. Thompson, please take Mr. Strait to the private viewing room. I'll have our selection of premium suits brought in immediately." As Trevor retreated to make arrangements, Ashley found herself suddenly alone with her musical hero. Her palms felt sweaty, and her heart continued its frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Thank you for speaking up," George said, his Texas drawl, as warm and genuine as it sounded on his records. "Not everyone would have the courage to do that." "I couldn't let him treat you that way," Ashley replied, finding her voice. "Your music, it means everything to me." George smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "Well, now, that's about the nicest thing I could hear. What's your name, darling?" "Ashley. Ashley Thompson." She led him toward the private viewing room at the back of the store, a luxurious space reserved for Elite Couture's most distinguished clients. "I'm from Cedar Creek, Texas, originally." "No kidding? That's good cattle country." George followed her, his boots making a familiar sound on the marble floors, a sound that seemed completely at odds with the boutique's refined atmosphere, yet somehow more authentic than anything else in the store. As they entered the viewing room, with its plush seating and flattering lighting, Ashley felt as though she had stepped into one of her own daydreams. Here she was, about to help George Strait, the voice of her childhood, the artist who had inspired her own musical journey, select a suit for one of the most prestigious nights in country music. What Ashley didn't know yet was that this unexpected encounter would become much more than an extraordinary anecdote to share with friends. The next few hours would change the course of her life forever, setting in motion events that neither she nor George could have anticipated when he first walked through the doors of Elite Couture. And it all began with a simple act of courage. Standing up for what was right, even when it would have been easier to remain silent. Inside the private viewing room, Ashley felt like she had stepped into another dimension. One where ordinary ranch girls from Texas found themselves helping country. Music legends choose custom suits. Her hands trembled slightly as she pulled fabric swatches from the displays. "These are our finest Italian wools," she explained, trying to maintain her professional composure despite the surreal situation. "For the CMA Awards, I'd suggest something. Oh, classic but distinguished. Your style has always been timeless. That's part of your appeal." George ran his fingers over a midnight blue fabric. "You know your stuff, Ashley. You mentioned you're from Cedar Creek. What brought you to Nashville?" There was something about George Strait's presence that invited honesty. Perhaps it was the way he listened, fully present, without the distracted glances or subtle checks of the time that Ashley had grown accustomed to from the boutique's wealthy clientele. "Music," she admitted. "Same as most people who end up here, I guess. I write songs, play guitar. I came here thinking I'd be the next, well, female George Strait." She laughed self-consciously. 3 years later, I'm still folding designer shirts and measuring inseams." George nodded thoughtfully. "Nashville's a tough town. Always has been. When I first came up from Texas, I got turned down by every record label, told my sound was too country." He chuckled at the irony. "Ended up going back home to work cattle." "But you came back," Ashley said. "Eventually. Sometimes the dream has to simmer a while before it's ready." He selected the midnight blue fabric. "This one reminds me of Texas skies." As Ashley made notes on the selection, the door opened and Trevor appeared with an older gentleman in a perfectly tailored suit. "Mr. Strait, this is Paolo Fiorentino, our master tailor," Trevor announced with excessive deference. "He rarely takes appointments without weeks of notice, but for you, he's made an exception." Paolo stepped forward, his discerning eye already taking measurements visually. "It is my honor, Mr. Strait. I have been listening to your music since I moved to America 30 years ago. Amarillo by morning, bellissimo." For the next hour, Ashley assisted as Paolo took precise measurements, discussing cut, style, and details with George. The country star maintained his unpretentious nature throughout, treating Paolo and Ashley with the same respect he would show to fellow performers at the Grand Ole Opry. Trevor hovered anxiously nearby, interjecting occasionally, with suggestions of additional purchases, cufflinks, a new belt, perhaps a matching suit for other occasions. Each time, George politely declined, stating he only needed the one suit. "I've got plenty of clothes gathering dust at home," he explained. "Norma, that's my wife, says I need to stop adding to the collection unless I'm getting rid of something old." 60 years of marriage, correct?" Paolo asked as he marked the sleeve length. George's face softened. 52 and counting. Best decision I ever made." Ashley couldn't help but smile. In an industry notorious for failed relationships and scandals, George Strait's enduring marriage was as legendary as his musical career. Another reason he remained her idol, not just for his talent, but for his character. As Paolo finished the preliminary measurements, Trevor stepped forward. "Mr. Strait, would you like to discuss payment options? For our premium clients, we offer—" "I'll just put it on my card," George interrupted gently, pulling a simple black credit card from his wallet. Trevor nodded eagerly. "Excellent choice, sir. Ashley, please process Mr. Strait's payment while I show Paolo out." When they were alone again, George turned to Ashley. "Thank you for your help today. You've got a good eye for this work." "Thank you, but this isn't really what I want to be doing," she confessed as she processed his payment. "It pays the bills while I try to make something happen with my music." George studied her for a moment. "You know, the CMA Awards after party always features up-and-coming artists in the smaller venues around the main event. You got anything recorded I could listen to?" Ashley froze, her finger hovering over the credit card terminal. Was George Strait actually asking to hear her music? The USB drive in her pocket suddenly felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Yes, actually, I have some demos. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Tell you what, George said, taking his receipt. I'm having lunch at Martin's BBQ after this. Why don't you join me when your shift ends and bring those demos? Ashley stared at him, certain she had misheard. You want me to have lunch with you to listen to my music? Unless you've got other plans, he replied with a slight smile. No, I don't have other plans. My shift ends at 2. Martin's. At 2:30 then, George confirmed, extending his hand. Thanks again for standing up for me earlier. Not everyone would have done that. As George left the private room, Ashley remained rooted to the spot, trying to process what had just happened. She was going to have lunch with George Strait. He was going to listen to her music. This kind of thing didn't happen in real life. At least, not in her life. The spell was broken by Trevor's return. His demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the condescending manager who had treated her like an inconvenience. Now he regarded her with calculated interest. Well, Thompson, it seems you've made quite an impression on Mr. Strait. His tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp. Funny you never mentioned being so knowledgeable about country music. You never asked, Ashley replied simply. Trevor's forced smile tightened. Yes, well, the Donovans are still waiting. Try not to keep them too long. They're spending a considerable amount on bridesmaid dresses. As Trevor walked away, Ashley checked her watch. 3 hours until she was supposed to meet George at Martin's. 3 hours of helping Tiffany Donovan choose between nearly identical shades of peach chiffon while trying to contain the hurricane of emotions swirling inside her. Ashley assisted the Donovans with practiced efficiency, though her mind was elsewhere. When Tiffany asked about George Strait, Ashley shared the minimum. Details necessary, feeling strangely protective of the encounter. This magical, unexpected moment was hers, and she wasn't ready to share it with Nashville's gossip mill. At precisely 2 o'clock, Ashley clocked out, retrieved her backpack from the employee locker room, and slipped out the back entrance to avoid Trevor's prying eyes. She ducked into the coffee shop bathroom across the street to change out of her work uniform, a black pencil skirt and white blouse, into jeans and a worn denim jacket over a simple white t-shirt. Her real clothes, as she thought of them. Looking in the mirror, she let her hair down from its tight ponytail and ran her fingers through it, trying to decide whether to apply more makeup. No, she decided. George Strait hadn't worn a mask. Neither would she. Martin's BBQ was crowded when she arrived, the lunch rush still in full swing. Ashley scanned the restaurant, half expecting George to have changed his mind or forgotten entirely. Then she spotted him, in a corner booth, his cowboy hat unmistakable even in the dimly lit restaurant. As she approached, she noticed he wasn't alone. Sitting across from him was an older man with silver hair and glasses, dressed in an expensive but understated suit. George stood when he saw her, his manners impeccable as always. Ashley, glad you could make it. This is my friend Bill Simmons. George gestured to the other man. Bill, this is Ashley Thompson, the young lady I was telling you about. Bill Simmons stood and extended his hand. Pleasure to meet you, Ashley. The name niggled at Ashley's memory. Bill Simmons. Why did that sound familiar? Then it hit her and she nearly gasped aloud. William Simmons was the president of Broken Spoke Records, one of Nashville's most respected independent country labels. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Simmons, she managed, shaking his hand and sliding into the booth beside George. George tells me you've got some original material, Bill said, getting straight to business. Says you stood up to some stuck-up boutique manager on his behalf. Ashley felt her cheeks warm. Anyone would have done the same. No, George interjected. They wouldn't have. Most people go along to get along, especially when their job might be on the line. takes courage to do the right thing, even when it costs you something. A waitress appeared and they ordered brisket for George, pulled pork for Bill, and smoked turkey for Ashley. When the waitress departed, Bill leaned forward. "So, Ashley Thompson from Cedar Creek, Texas, tell me about your music." It was surreal, sitting in a Nashville BBQ joint, discussing her songwriting with two legends of the country music industry. Yet something about George's genuine interest and Bill's straightforward questions put her at ease. She found herself speaking freely about her influences, her writing process, and the stories behind her songs. "Sounds like you've got something to say," Bill commented when she finished. "That's rarer than you might think in this town. Everyone wants to be famous, but not everyone has something worth hearing." "I brought some demos," Ashley said, pulling the USB drive from her pocket. She'd listened to these recordings hundreds of times, scrutinizing every note, every inflection. They were far from perfect, recorded in her friend's makeshift studio with borrowed equipment, but they were honest. Bill took the drive, turning it over in his palm as if assessing its weight. "I'll give these a listen. No promises, but if they're half as good as George seems to think your character is, we might have something to talk about." Ashley's heart leaped into her throat. "Thank you, Mr. Simmons. That's more than I could have hoped for." Their food arrived momentarily, pausing the conversation. As they ate, the discussion shifted to the changing landscape of country music, the eternal tension between traditional sounds and commercial trends, the challenge of finding authentic voices in an increasingly homogenized industry. Throughout the meal, Ashley noticed something remarkable about both men. Despite their status in the industry, neither George nor Bill spoke with condescension or arrogance. They asked her opinion and listened to her answers as if they truly valued her perspective. It was a stark contrast to the dismissive treatment she regularly experienced at Elite Couture, where her thoughts and feelings were considered irrelevant. As lunch concluded, Bill excused himself, mentioning a meeting across town. He pocketed Ashley's USB drive with a promise to call within the week, regardless of his decision. The casual way he made this commitment suggested it was not merely a polite dismissal. Bill Simmons actually intended to listen to her music. After Bill departed, George ordered coffee for himself and Ashley. There was something he wanted to discuss, he explained, something beyond her music. "That manager at the store, Trevor, was it? He reminds me of a lot of people I've met in this business," George began, stirring cream into his coffee. "People who judge books by their covers, who think wealth or fame is the same thing as worth." Ashley nodded. "He treats customers differently based on how much he thinks they'll spend. Does the same with employees, too." "People like that," George continued, "they're missing the whole point of life. My daddy used to say, the only thing you take with you when you leave this world is your character and the way you treated others. Everything else stays behind." "Your father sounds wise," Ashley remarked. "He was." George's eyes grew distant. "With memory. Taught me everything important I know, how to work cattle, how to respect women, how to keep my word. Never did teach me how to dress for fancy award shows, though." He chuckled, lightening the moment. Ashley smiled, but her thoughts had already drifted to the problem waiting for her back at Elite Couture. Trevor had seen her interaction with George. He'd witnessed her challenge his authority, something no employee had dared do before. There would be consequences, if not immediate termination, then the slow punishment of reduced hours and undesirable shifts until she was forced to quit. George seemed to read her thoughts. "You're worried about your job." It wasn't a question, but Ashley answered anyway. "Trevor doesn't forget when someone crosses him, and I definitely crossed him today." George considered this, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee mug. "Sometimes standing up for what's right comes with a price. Question is, was it worth paying?" "Absolutely," Ashley replied without hesitation. "I'd do it again in a heartbeat." That's what I figured you'd say. George reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. My personal number. If Trevor gives you any trouble at all, you call me, day or night. Ashley stared at the card, overwhelmed by the gesture. Mr. Strait, I can't ask you to... You didn't ask. I offered. His voice was gentle but firm. And it's George, please. Anyone who stands up to a bully on my behalf has earned the right to use my first name. Ashley took the card, carefully placing it in her wallet. Thank you, George, for everything today. Don't thank me yet, he replied with a wink. Wait and see what Bill says about your music. That man's got ears like a bat and standards higher than heaven. If he likes what he hears, that'll be something worth thanking me for. As they finished their coffee, Ashley glanced at her watch and realized she had been away from the store for nearly 2 hours. Her evening plans included a shift at her second job, waiting tables at a downtown bar where tourists regularly requested country songs from the house band. For the first time, that prospect didn't fill her with exhaustion. Tonight, she would serve drinks and clear tables with a secret warming her heart. George Strait had her demos, and Bill Simmons was going to listen to her music. What Ashley couldn't possibly know was that her interaction with George had affected him just as profoundly as it had affected her. As he paid their lunch bill, George was already formulating a plan, one that would test Trevor's character, challenge Nashville's preconceptions, and potentially change Ashley's life forever. But first, there would be a reckoning at Elite Couture, where Trevor Blackwell was anxiously awaiting Ashley's return, his outward contrition masking a simmering resentment that threatened to boil over at any moment. George Strait sat alone in his Nashville hotel suite, staring at the city lights twinkling beyond his window. The encounter at Elite Couture kept replaying in his mind. 50 years in the music business had taught him to recognize authentic talent and genuine character. Ashley Thompson had both in spades. He picked up his phone and dialed a familiar number. Bill, it's George. Sorry to call so late. George Strait calling after 10? The world must be ending. Bill Simmons chuckled on the other end. I've been listening to those demos, George said, leaning back in his chair. That girl's got something special, doesn't she? Bill's voice turned serious. She's the real deal. Raw, needs polishing, but there's soul there. Reminds me a bit of Miranda when she was starting out. That same honesty in her writing. So what are you thinking? I'm bringing her in tomorrow morning. Want to see if she can perform live the way she does on those recordings. If she can... Bill paused. Well, let's just say Broken Spoke might have a new female artist on the roster. George smiled, satisfaction warming his chest. Good. She deserves a shot. That girl stood up for me when she had everything to lose. After ending the call, George turned his attention to the other matter weighing on his mind, the boutique manager, Trevor. The man's condescending attitude wasn't just directed at customers he deemed unworthy. George had observed how he treated his staff, particularly Ashley. In George's experience, character revealed itself in how people treated those they believed couldn't help them. The next morning, George dressed casually, jeans, boots, and a simple button-down shirt, and headed downtown. His first stop wasn't Broken Spoke Records, where Ashley would be meeting with Bill. Instead, he walked into Elite Couture 15 minutes after opening. The store was quiet, with just 2 employees arranging new merchandise displays. Trevor emerged from the back office, his expression transforming from irritation to exaggerated delight when he spotted George. Mr. Strait, what an unexpected pleasure! Trevor hurried forward, hand extended. Is there an issue with your suit order? No issue, George replied, shaking the man's hand briefly. I was hoping to speak with Ashley Thompson. Trevor's smile faltered. I'm afraid Ashley isn't in yet. Perhaps I can assist you with something. When do you expect her? Well, actually, Trevor hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. She requested the morning off. A personal matter, she said. George nodded, suppressing a smile. The personal matter was her meeting with Bill. I see. Then perhaps you and I could have a conversation, Trevor. Trevor brightened. Of course. Would you like to use the private viewing room again? That won't be necessary. This won't take long. Something in George's tone made Trevor's expression shift from eager to wary. How can I help you, Mr. Strait? I'm curious about something, George began, his voice conversational, though his eyes were sharp. How long have you managed this store? Nearly 5 years, Trevor answered, straightening his designer tie. I've increased our revenue by 30% in that time. Impressive, George acknowledged. And before that, I understand you worked in the music industry? Trevor's eyes widened slightly at this unexpected knowledge. Yes, I was a talent coordinator at Riverfront Records for several years. George nodded thoughtfully. Small world. My nephew interned there about 6 years back. Ryan Strait, tall. He kid studied music business at Belmont. Trevor paled visibly. I believe I remember Ryan, yes. That's interesting, George replied, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly, because Ryan certainly remembers you. Tells me you were quite the gatekeeper, deciding which demos got heard and which were trashed without ever making it to the producers' desks. Trevor swallowed hard, his composure cracking. That's simply how the business works, Mr. Strait. We received hundreds of submissions weekly. Someone had to filter them. Someone had to judge who was worthy and who wasn't, George corrected mildly. Just like you judged me when I walked in here yesterday. Mr. Strait, I've already apologized for that misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding, Trevor. It was a character reveal. George stepped closer, his voice low but firm. You know what I've learned in 60-plus years of life. People who need to make others feel small rarely have anything substantial to offer themselves. Trevor's face flushed, a mixture of embarrassment and anger coloring his cheeks. With all due respect, Mr. Strait, I don't think you understand. The pressures of managing a premium establishment like Elite Couture. Certain standards must be maintained. Standards, George repeated, letting the word hang in the air. My father was a junior high school math teacher in a small Texas town, wore the same 3 suits for 30 years, never made more than $30,000 a year, but that man had standards that would put your premium establishment to shame. Trevor remained silent, seemingly unsure how to respond to this unexpected personal revelation from a country music icon. My point, George continued, is that there's a difference between standards and snobbery. One builds people up, the other tears them down. From what I've seen, you excel at the latter. Mr. Strait, if this is about Ashley Thompson, this is about basic human decency, George interrupted. But since you mentioned Ashley, let's talk about her. Did you know she's meeting with Bill Simmons at Broken Spoke Records right now? Trevor's expression confirmed he did know, though he seemed surprised that George was aware. Bill doesn't waste time on mediocre talent, George continued. If he's bringing her in after hearing those demos, it means something significant might be happening for her, something that could change her life. Trevor shifted uncomfortably. I'm happy for her, of course, but are you? George asked. Simply because my impression was that you enjoy keeping people like Ashley in their place, reminding them of their limitations rather than their potential. The accusation hung in the air, uncomfortably accurate. Trevor's silence was more revealing than any defense he might have attempted. I didn't come here to lecture you, George said, his tone softening slightly. I came to offer some advice, one Nashville professional to another. Trevor looked up, wary but attentive. The music business is smaller than most people realize, George explained. Reputations travel fast and last long. Right now, you've got a reputation problem. I don't understand. Ryan isn't the only person who remembers how you operated at Riverfront. There's a reason you're managing a clothing store instead of developing artists at a label. Trevor's face hardened. That's unfair. I left Riverfront by choice to pursue better opportunities. George simply looked at him, the kind of steady gaze that had made better liars than Trevor Blackwell squirm in their shoes. After a moment, Trevor's eyes dropped. What exactly do you want from me, Mr. Strait? A second chance. Not for you, but for the people you impact every day. Your employees, your customers, people like Ashley, who deserve better than what you've been giving them. Before Trevor could respond, the boutique door opened, and Paolo, the master tailor, entered. His face lit up when he spotted George. Mr. Strait, I was not expecting to see you today. We are still completing the alterations on your suit. Not hear about the suit, Paolo, George replied with a genuine smile. Just having a conversation with Trevor about management styles. Paolo's eyes darted between the two men, clearly sensing the tension. I see. Well, I have brought the fabric samples you requested, Trevor, for the charity gala displays. Trevor nodded stiffly. Thank you, Paolo. Would you mind taking them to the back? I'll be there shortly. After Paolo disappeared into the workroom, Trevor turned back to George, his professional mask firmly back in place. I appreciate your feedback, Mr. Strait. If there's nothing else, I should attend to my duties. George wasn't fooled by the abrupt shift. He'd seen it countless times throughout his career. People who showed one face to those they wanted to impress and another to everyone else. Still, he'd said his piece. The rest was up to Trevor. Just one more thing, George said, reaching into his pocket and extracting an envelope. I'd like you to give this to Ashley when she comes in later. Trevor accepted the envelope with obvious curiosity. May I ask what it is? A ticket to the CMA Awards next week, front row, center section. George allowed himself a small smile at Trevor's shocked expression. I'd give it to her myself, but I'm heading back to Texas this afternoon. Have some cattle that need tending before award season kicks into gear. You're giving Ashley Thompson a front row ticket to the CMA Awards? Trevor couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. She'll need to be there, George replied simply, especially if things go well with Bill today. As George turned to leave, Trevor called after him. Why are you doing this for her? You barely know her. George paused at the door. Because 20 years ago, I was a nobody from Texas who walked into a Nashville record label wearing the wrong clothes and speaking with the wrong accent. The receptionist took one look and decided I didn't belong there. What happened? Trevor asked, despite himself. A producer named Ray Jenkins overheard her trying to send me away. He intervened, listened to my demo tape, and signed me that afternoon. George's eyes held Trevor's. We all need someone to see past the surface, Trevor. Ashley did that for me yesterday. I'm just returning the favor. With those words, George Strait, the king of country, walked out of Elite Couture, leaving Trevor Blackwell standing alone among the expensive clothes that had become his measure of human worth. Across town, Ashley Thompson sat in Bill Simmons' office, her beaten-up guitar case propped against her chair. She had just finished playing Sunrise Over Cedar Creek, the most personal song from her demo collection. The final chord still hung in the air between them. Bill removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully with his handkerchief. You wrote that about your grandfather's farm, you said. Ashley nodded, trying to read his expression. He taught me to play guitar there. Said music was the best way to watch a sunrise. Smart man, Bill commented, replacing his glasses. Ashley, I've been in this business for 35 years, signed some legends, missed some opportunities, heard every kind of voice imaginable. What I just heard from you is something increasingly rare in Nashville. Ashley held her breath, afraid to hope. Authenticity, Bill continued. No gimmicks, no imitation, just honest storytelling set to melody. He leaned forward. It needs work. Your bridge structures could be stronger, and we'd need to refine your sound for radio. But the foundation is solid, very solid. Thank You, Ashley managed, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm prepared to offer you a development deal with Broken Spoke, Bill stated matter-of-factly. 6 months of working with our songwriting team, vocal coaching, image consultation, culminating in a 3-song EP. If that goes well, we discuss a full record deal. Ashley's hands trembled in her lap. A development deal? With Broken Spoke? Records? Bill smiled slightly. Unless you'd prefer to keep folding sweaters at that boutique. No, yes, I accept. Ashley's professionalism dissolved into pure joy. Thank you, Mr. Simmons. I won't disappoint you. Call me Bill, he replied, extending his hand. And thank George Strait. In 35 years, he's only ever recommended 3 artists to me. The other 2 have multiple Grammy Awards between them. He seems to think you have that same potential. As they shook hands, finalizing an agreement that would transform her life, Ashley couldn't help but marvel at how quickly everything had changed. Yesterday morning, she had been just another retail employee being mistreated by her manager. Now, she was sitting in the office of one of Nashville's most respected label executives, being offered the opportunity she had dreamed of since she was a little girl playing guitar on her grandfather's porch. And it had all started because George Strait, the king of country himself, had walked into a high-end boutique dressed like an ordinary rancher, forcing everyone to choose between appearance and character. Ashley had chosen character. Now, that choice was changing everything. What she didn't yet realize was that George's conversation with Trevor would have consequences beyond her wildest imagination. Consequences that would ripple through Nashville's music scene and eventually place her directly in the spotlight. She had always dreamed of, but in a way no one could have predicted. 1 week later, George Strait stood backstage at the Country Music Association Awards, adjusting his bolo tie before his performance. Around him swirled the controlled chaos typical of live television productions. Stagehands rushed past with equipment, performers received last-minute makeup touch-ups, and producers spoke urgently into headsets. 2 minutes, Mr. Strait, a production assistant informed him, before hurrying away to deliver the same message to the next performer. George acknowledged with a nod, his outward calm belying the unusual anticipation he felt tonight. This wasn't about his own performance or the potential awards. After 47 CMA nominations and 23 wins throughout his career, the familiar nervous energy had long since mellowed into comfortable routine. No, tonight's anticipation was about Ashley Thompson. His phone buzzed with a text message from Bill Simmons. She's here. Front row as arranged. Looks terrified, but determined. George smiled. Good. That meant she hadn't backed down, despite whatever pressures Trevor might have applied after learning about her development deal. The boutique manager had seemed genuinely shaken by their conversation last week. But George had been in Nashville long enough to know that some people only changed when forced to by circumstances beyond their control. Those circumstances were about to arrive. 40 minutes later, having delivered a flawless performance of his latest single, George stood at the podium, preparing to present the award for Female Vocalist of the Year. The teleprompter displayed his scripted introduction, but as the applause died down, he set aside the prepared remarks. You know, he began conversationally, one of the greatest privileges of my career has been watching new talent emerge and transform country music with fresh perspectives. The audience quieted, sensing an unscripted moment from an artist not known for spontaneity at award shows. I've been doing this for over 40 years now, George continued, and I'm often asked what keeps me going. The answer is simple. It's the music, the stories, the authentic expression of human experience that defines this genre we all love. From his position on stage, George could see Ashley in the front row, her eyes wide with admiration and nervousness. Beside her sat Bill Simmons, watching George with knowing amusement. Recently, I was reminded that authenticity doesn't always come in the packages we expect. Sometimes it arrives in unusual wrapping, like a shop girl at a fancy boutique who writes songs with more truth in them than half of what you hear on radio today. A ripple of curious murmurs spread through the audience. This was definitely not the scripted introduction for Female Vocalist of the Year. Don't worry, George added with a wry smile. I'm getting to the nominees. But first, I want to recognize someone in our audience tonight. Someone who reminds me why I fell in love with country music in the first place. The camera operators looked to their directors in confusion, uncertain where to point their lenses during this unplanned segment. Ashley Thompson, George said clearly, would you stand up for a moment? The spotlight operators, professional enough to follow the legendary artist's lead, quickly found Ashley in the front row. Her face registered shock as she hesitantly rose to her feet, her simple black dress, clearly the best she could afford on a retail salary, a stark contrast to the designer gowns surrounding her. Folks, remember this name, George continued, Ashley Thompson. A few months from now you'll be hearing her songs on the radio, and a year from now, he paused, his expression confident. Well, she might just be standing where I am now. La. The audience applauded politely, if somewhat confusedly, uncertain why George Strait was using his presenting slot to promote an unknown artist. Ashley, crimson with embarrassment, yet beaming with disbelief, quickly sat back down. Now, George transitioned smoothly. Let's recognize the extraordinary women who are already changing the landscape of country music. The nominees for Female Vocalist of the Year are... As he read the nominees and opened the envelope to announce the winner, George knew he had just altered Ashley's trajectory permanently. In an industry built on relationships and perception, his public endorsement was worth more than any development deal. He had effectively transferred a portion of his own immense credibility to her, creating instant interest in a previously unknown songwriter. And somewhere in the audience, likely watching with gritted teeth, Trevor Blackwell was learning a powerful lesson about judging people prematurely. The morning after the CMAs, George had breakfast with Bill Simmons at the Hermitage Hotel. The elegant dining room was filling with Nashville's power players, many still discussing the previous night's awards and performances. That wasn't part of the plan, Bill remarked as their coffee arrived. The Ashley Thompson spotlight moment. George buttered a piece of toast. Plans change. They certainly do. Bill leaned back in his chair, studying his old friend. You realize what you've done? My phone hasn't stopped ringing since last night. Every producer, studio executive, and A&R person in Nashville wants to know who she is and how they missed her. Good, George replied simply. That means they'll pay attention when her EP releases. Bill shook his head, amused yet concerned. You've put an enormous target on that girl's back, George. The expectations will be crushing. She's good, very good even, but she's green, untested. What if she can't deliver under this kind of pressure? George considered this as he sipped his coffee. You remember when I first signed with MCA? Critics said I was too traditional, too country for commercial success. Said the urban cowboy trend was ending and I'd missed the boat. And you proved them wrong with 13 multi-platinum albums, Bill acknowledged. Point is, pressure either crushes you or crystallizes you into something stronger. I've spent enough time with Ashley to believe she's the crystallizing type. Bill sighed. For her sake, I hope you're right. We're accelerating her development schedule based on the interest you've generated. First single needs to drop while people still remember your endorsement. George nodded, satisfied. She'll be ready? As they continued their breakfast, discussing production schedules and potential collaborators for Ashley's project, neither man noticed the slender woman who had entered the dining room and was now being seated across the restaurant. Melissa Winters, Elite Couture's senior saleswoman, immediately recognized George Strait and discreetly texted her boss. Trevor, George Strait is having breakfast at the Hermitage with Bill Simmons from Broken Spoke, discussing Ashley Thompson. 3 miles away, Trevor Blackwell stared at the text message, his frustration mounting. Since George Strait's impromptu visit to Elite Couture, Trevor's carefully constructed world had been crumbling around him. First, Ashley had returned from her meeting with Bill Simmons not to resign, as Trevor had expected, but to request a part-time position with flexible hours to accommodate her new development deal. Then she had somehow secured a front-row ticket to the CMAs, a ticket that typically cost thousands if it was available at all, only to be publicly acknowledged by one of country music's biggest legends. Now she was, apparently, the subject of breakfast conversation between said legend and one of Nashville's most influential record executives. Trevor's phone rang, his district manager calling for the 3rd time that week. "Trevor," the woman began without preamble, "I've just received another email from corporate about the George Strait situation. Apparently, he's told several industry connections about his experience at Elite Couture." Trevor swallowed hard. What exactly is he saying? That he was initially dismissed as a potential customer because of his appearance until an associate, Ashley Thompson, intervened. Corporate is concerned about the potential impact on our brand image. George Strait represents significant influencer capital in Nashville. "I understand," Trevor replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. "But surely one misunderstanding—" "This isn't about one misunderstanding," his district manager interrupted. "This is about a pattern of behavior that's been brought to my attention since this incident occurred. 3 former employees have reached out with similar stories about your management approach." Trevor felt his stomach drop. "Former employees? But I'll be conducting a full review of your store's operations next week. In the meantime, I suggest you reflect carefully on the kind of workplace culture you've been fostering at Elite Couture." Her tone softened slightly. "We all make mistakes, Trevor. How we respond to them defines our character and our career trajectory." After ending the call, Trevor sat motionless at his desk, the magnitude of his situation sinking in. His professional reputation, carefully cultivated through years of strategic networking and image management, was unraveling because he had misjudged a man in dusty boots and inadvertently alienated an employee with powerful new connections. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had spent his entire career assessing people's value based on superficial criteria, their clothes, their connections, their immediate usefulness to his ambitions. Now, those same superficial judgments threatened everything he had built. As he contemplated his rapidly diminishing options, Trevor's gaze fell on the store's sales records. Something caught his attention. Since Ashley had begun working part-time, dividing her hours between Elite Couture and Broken Spoke Records, her sales figures had actually increased. Not only was she selling more in less time, but several clients had specifically requested her assistance, including the notoriously difficult Johnsons. A reluctant realization dawned on Trevor. Perhaps Ashley's authenticity, the very quality he had secretly scorned as unsophisticated, was precisely what connected with their clientele. Perhaps her genuine approach was more effective than his own carefully calculated performance of exclusivity. It was an uncomfortable thought for a man who had built his identity around projecting an image of refinement and superiority. Meanwhile, across town at Broken Spoke Records, Ashley sat in a writing session with 2 established Nashville songwriters, trying not to feel overwhelmed. The small, soundproofed room contained a piano, 3 guitars on stands, and a whiteboard covered with potential song titles and lyric fragments. "Let's try that bridge again," suggested Marcus Hendricks, a 50-something songwriter with 15 #1 hits to his credit. "But this time, lean into the vulnerability more. That's your strength, Ashley. Emotional honesty. Ashley nodded, adjusting her capo before beginning the bridge section they'd been working on for the past hour. As she sang, she poured her conflicting emotions into the lyrics. Her excitement about this unexpected opportunity, her fear of failure, her gratitude toward George Strait, and her lingering resentment toward Trevor. When she finished, both Marcus and Carla Diaz, the other songwriter, were nodding appreciatively. "That's it," Carla said decisively. "That's the version. There's something in your voice when you sing it that way, like you're telling a secret you've never told anyone before." Ashley blushed at the praise. "It still feels strange, having legendary songwriters like you two helping me develop my material." Marcus waved away her comment. "First rule of Nashville: everyone starts somewhere. I was a plumber when I wrote. My first hit, Carla was waiting tables. Working retail," Ashley added with a small smile. "Exactly. Second rule of Nashville: what matters is the song, not where it came from." Marcus picked up his guitar. "Now, let's tackle the second verse. I think we need to connect the childhood memory more directly to the present-day revelation." As they continued refining the song, Ashley felt a buzz of creative energy unlike anything she'd experienced during her solitary writing sessions in her apartment. This collaborative process, building on each other's ideas, pushing past the obvious choices to find deeper emotional truth, was transforming her raw talent into professional craftsmanship. By late afternoon, they had completed 2 songs that would potentially appear on her upcoming EP. As they packed up their instruments, Bill Simmons stopped by to check on their progress. "How's it going in here?" he asked, poking his head into the writing room. "We've got gold," Marcus replied confidently. "Ashley's Cedar Creek Sunrise is single material. Radio ready with the right production." Bill's eyebrows rose as he turned to Ashley. "Is that the personal one about your grandfather's farm?" She nodded, simultaneously proud and slightly embarrassed by the attention. "We reworked it, strengthened the chorus, added a bridge that connects the past and present themes." "I'd like to hear it," Bill said, settling into an empty chair. Ashley exchanged glances with Marcus and Carla, who both nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she picked up her guitar and began to play the revised version of the song that had first caught George Strait's attention. The new arrangement maintained the emotional core of her original composition, but enhanced it with structural improvements and lyrical refinements that brought her story into sharper focus. As she sang the final chorus, Ashley realized she had crossed an invisible threshold, from talented amateur to emerging professional. When she finished, Bill was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he nodded once, decisively. "That's our lead single. Let's get it recorded next week." "Next week?" Ashley asked, surprised by the accelerated timeline. "George's public endorsement created a window of opportunity," Bill explained. "We need to capitalize on it before the industry's notoriously short attention span shifts elsewhere." He stood, checking his watch. "Which reminds me, you have an interview with Country Music Today at 5 o'clock. Their New Voices feature." Ashley's eyes widened. "Today? But I'm not prepared. I don't know what to say, how to present myself." "Just be yourself," Bill advised, his expression softening slightly. "That's what George saw in you, what we all see in you. Authenticity in an industry full of carefully constructed personas." As Bill left to prepare for her interview, Ashley sat motionless, overwhelmed by the speed at which her life was transforming. 1 week ago, she had been folding designer shirts and enduring Trevor's condescension. Now she had written songs, with hit songwriters, was preparing to record her first professional single, and was about to be interviewed by one of country music's most prominent publications. And it had all started because George Strait, a man who could have easily been offended by Trevor's dismissive treatment, had instead chosen to see past it. recognizing something in Ashley that reminded him of his own journey. What Ashley couldn't know as she prepared for her first media interview was that George Strait's investment in her career went far beyond a chance encounter and impulsive endorsement. For reasons he had not yet revealed to anyone, not even to Bill, George saw in Ashley's story an opportunity to address a deeper issue within the country music industry, one that had troubled him for years. And Trevor Blackwell, currently reassessing, his entire approach to people and business would inadvertently play a crucial role in what was to come. 3 months after the CMA Awards, George Strait sat in the back of a packed Nashville venue called the Listening Room. He wore a simple black cowboy hat pulled low, allowing him to observe the crowd without drawing attention to himself. The intimate space, designed for showcasing songwriters, had sold out within minutes when Ashley Thompson's name appeared on the marquee. On stage, Ashley adjusted her microphone, looking more confident than the nervous retail associate George had. Met at Elite Couture, her debut single, Cedar Creek Sunrise, had been climbing the country charts for 6 weeks, currently sitting at number 17, an extraordinary achievement for a new artist. This next song is brand new, Ashley addressed the attentive crowd. It's called Dusty Boots and Diamonds, and it's about how appearances can be deceiving. Her eyes scanned the audience, landing briefly on George in the shadows, before continuing. About how sometimes the most important people in our lives don't always look the part when they first walk through our doors. As Ashley began to play, George listened intently to the lyrics. A thinly veiled account of their first meeting at Elite Couture, transformed into a universal story about judgment, redemption, and unexpected chances. The chorus particularly struck him. Some angels wear dusty boots instead of wings. Some blessings don't shine until you look past the bling. Sometimes life hides its treasures in the strangest of places. And sometimes second chances come with unexpected faces. The audience responded enthusiastically, many already singing along, despite the song not yet being released. George noticed several industry executives in attendance, including representatives from radio stations and streaming platforms. Ashley Thompson had become Nashville's most discussed new artist, her rapid rise fueled by both genuine talent and the intrigue surrounding her unexpected discovery. After the show, George made his way backstage, navigating through the crowd of well-wishers surrounding Ashley. When she spotted him, her face lit up. "You came!" she exclaimed, breaking away to greet him. "Wouldn't have missed it," George replied with genuine warmth. "Sounds like you've been busy these past few months." Ashley laughed, a free, joyful sound that reflected her transformed circumstances. Busy doesn't begin to cover it. Recording, sessions, radio tours, media training. It's been a whirlwind. "The new song, about the boots and diamonds," George commented. "That's our story. It's about perspective," Ashley corrected gently. "About looking beyond the surface. You taught me that." George smiled, thinking how this young woman had no idea of the full circle this moment represented for him. "Would you have time for coffee tomorrow?" "There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Ashley checked her phone. "I have a meeting with the label at 11, but I'm free at 9. 9 works, George confirmed. "The usual place?" The usual place had become a small, unpretentious diner 3 blocks from Broken Spoke Records. A spot where George could eat breakfast without being constantly approached for autographs, and where Ashley could decompress from the increasing pressures of her budding fame. The following morning, George arrived first, selecting a booth in the back. He ordered coffee and waited, his mind drifting to the decision he had made during Ashley's performance the previous night. When she arrived, cheeks flushed from the February cold, George was struck by how much she had changed in just a few months. There was a new confidence in her posture, a clarity in her eyes that came from finding her purpose. Yet beneath the Professional Polish, she remained the authentic, straightforward person who had stood up for a stranger in cowboy boots. "Sorry, I'm a few minutes late," Ashley apologized, sliding into the booth. "Songwriting session ran long last night." "Creating something good?" George inquired after the waitress had taken their orders. "I think so. Different from my first batch of songs, more reflective about all the changes happening." She stirred cream into her coffee. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is my life now. 6 months ago, I was folding sweaters and watching my dreams slip away. Now you're living them," George finished. "But I'm guessing it's not all been easy." Ashley's expression turned more serious. "The spotlight is intense. Everyone has opinions about my music, my looks, my background. Some people think I haven't paid my dues, that I got here because of your endorsement rather than talent." "And what do you think?" George asked quietly. "I think I got an opportunity that thousands of talented people never get," she answered honestly. "And I'm working 18 hours a day to prove I deserve it." She paused, then added, "But sometimes I wonder why me? Why did you choose to help me that day?" George nodded, having anticipated this question. "That's actually why I wanted to meet with you this morning." He reached into his jacket and removed an aged photograph, sliding it across the table. "Take a look at this." Ashley picked up the photograph carefully. It showed a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, with long dark hair and a familiar smile, standing next to a much younger George Strait. She wore a simple dress and held an acoustic guitar. "Who is she?" Ashley asked, studying the image. "That's Catherine Mills," George replied, his voice softening with memory. "Kathy, one of the most talented songwriters I ever knew. That picture was taken in 1978, before my first record deal." Ashley looked up, sensing the importance of what George was sharing. "Were you two friends?" George clarified. "Close friends who shared the same dreams. We came to Nashville together from Texas, played the same dive bars, wrote songs at the same kitchen table." His eyes grew distant. "Kathy had something special, a way with lyrics that cut straight through to the truth of things. She taught me how to turn a good song into a great one." "What happened to her?" Ashley asked gently. "Nashville happened to her," George replied, a hint of old pain coloring his words. "Or more specifically, the Nashville of 45 years ago happened to her. We came here believing talent was all that mattered. We were both naive." The waitress arrived with their breakfast, interrupting momentarily. When she departed, George continued. "Back then, the industry had very specific ideas about what female country artists should look like, sound like, write about. Kathy didn't fit the mold. Her songs were too honest, too complex. Her appearance wasn't glamorous enough, and unlike me, she didn't find that one person willing to look past the surface and see the gift underneath." "What became of her?" Ashley asked, her food forgotten. George took a sip of coffee before answering. "She wrote songs for other people for a while, had a few recorded by mid-level artists. Eventually, she got tired of fighting an industry that kept telling her she wasn't enough. Not pretty enough, not commercial enough, not the right kind of female voice." He paused. "She went back to Texas, married her high school sweetheart, who taught music at an elementary school until she retired." "Did she regret leaving Nashville?" George considered this. "I asked her that once, about 15 years ago. She said she regretted that Nashville couldn't see past its own narrow vision of what women in country music should be, but she didn't regret the life she built instead." Ashley looked again at the photograph. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because history repeats itself," George said simply. "When I walked into Elite Couture and saw how Trevor dismissed me based on appearance, it wasn't the first time I'd experienced that kind of judgment, but it reminded me of something more important, how Kathy was dismissed again and again by people who couldn't see past their preconceptions." Understanding dawned. in Ashley's eyes. So when I stood up to Trevor, you did what no one did for Kathy, George confirmed. And I decided right then that I wouldn't let another talented voice get silenced because of the industry's superficial judgments. Is that why you called me out at the CMAs? Ashley asked. To make sure I couldn't be ignored? George nodded. The industry hasn't changed as much as it should have since Kathy's time. Still too focused on packaging rather than substance, especially for women artists. I wanted to use whatever influence I've earned to make sure you got a fair hearing. Ashley sat quietly for a moment, absorbing this revelation. That's why my song resonated with you so much. Cedar Creek Sunrise. It reminded you of her writing, didn't it? It has the same honesty, George acknowledged, the same emotional clarity. Kathy would have loved it. He hesitated, then added, There's something else you should know, Ashley. Something I've never told anyone in the industry. Ashley waited, sensing the weight of what was coming. 3 of my early hit songs that helped establish my career, were actually written by Kathy Mills. George's voice was quiet but clear. We agreed to keep that private because back then it would have been harder for me to get those songs recorded if they were known to be written by a woman. Ashley's eyes widened with surprise. Which songs? Morning After Memories, Texas, Twilight, and When Forever Ends, George replied, naming 3 classics from his early catalogue. The publishing royalties always went to her under a pseudonym, but the official credits listed only my name. That must have been hard for her, Ashley observed thoughtfully. It was, George agreed, and it's been weighing on me for decades. Which brings me to my proposal. He leaned forward slightly. I'm planning a special concert at the Ryman Auditorium for my 70th birthday next month. A celebration of my career and the people who helped shape it. I want to use that platform to finally acknowledge Kathy's contribution publicly, and I want you to help me do it. Me? How? By performing those songs with me, by helping me tell the story of a talented woman who should have had the opportunities you're getting now. George's expression was both determined and vulnerable, a legend preparing to reveal a long-held truth. It's time to set the record straight, and your voice is the right one to help me do it. Ashley sat speechless for several moments, understanding the magnitude of what George was proposing. This wasn't just about her career anymore. It was about rectifying a historical wrong, about honoring a forgotten voice, about challenging an industry that still struggled with authentic representation. I'd be honored, she finally said. More than honored. But are you sure this is what you want to do? It might change how people view your early success. George smiled slightly. I'm 70 years old, Ashley. I've had 40 years of success beyond those early songs. My legacy can withstand the truth. And honestly, it needs the truth to be complete. As they finished their breakfast, discussing the details of the upcoming tribute, neither noticed the man who had entered the diner and now stood frozen near the entrance, staring at their booth. Trevor Blackwell had come to this neighborhood to meet with the owner of a small men's boutique about a potential position. Since the review by his district manager, his situation at Elite Couture had become untenable. Too many stories had emerged about his pattern of behavior, not just toward customers, but toward employees as well. Yesterday, he had been informed that his services would no longer be required. Now, watching George Strait and Ashley Thompson deep in conversation, the retail associate he had belittled, now sitting as an equal with a country music legend, Trevor felt the full weight of his miscalculation. Before he could decide whether to approach them or retreat unnoticed, Ashley looked up and spotted him. He saw a flicker of surprise cross her face, followed by something unexpected, not triumph or smugness, but a simple acknowledgement. She gave him a small nod, then returned her attention to George. That simple gesture, neither vindictive nor dismissive, struck Trevor more powerfully than any confrontation could have. In that moment, he understood that Ashley had moved beyond their previous dynamic. She had neither forgotten the past nor remained trapped by it. She had simply moved forward into a future where his opinion no longer defined her worth. It was perhaps the most profound lesson Trevor had ever received about the true nature of dignity and success. 4 weeks later, the historic Ryman Auditorium was filled to capacity for George Strait 7 decades of country. The evening had been billed as a career retrospective featuring special guests and unexpected surprises. Music industry executives, fellow artists, and fortunate fans packed the hallowed venue, eager to celebrate the King of Country's 70th birthday. After performing several of his biggest hits with various guest artists, George moved to center stage, where a single spotlight illuminated him. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the historic space. 70 years is a long time to be alive, and 47 years is a long time to be making music. Along the way, I've been blessed to work with some extraordinary people. The audience applauded warmly, sensing something significant in his tone. "Tonight, I want to acknowledge someone who shaped my career in its earliest days, someone whose contribution has remained in the shadows for far too long." George paused, his expression solemn. "Some of you may have heard the story of how I met a young retail associate named Ashley Thompson a few months ago. How her authenticity reminded me of something important I'd nearly forgotten." A murmur rippled through the audience as Ashley stepped into the spotlight beside George, guitar in hand. "What you don't know," George continued, "is the full story behind that moment. Tonight, Ashley and I would like to share it with you, through music and through truth." As George began to tell the story of Catherine Mills, the talented songwriter who never got her chance to shine, a photograph appeared on the large screen behind them, the same image he had shown Ashley in the diner. In the audience, music journalists leaned forward, sensing a significant industry revelation unfolding. When George finally acknowledged Kathy as the true writer of 3 of his early hits, the Ryman grew so quiet that the building's famous acoustics seemed to amplify the silence itself. "Tonight," George concluded, "Ashley Thompson and I would like to perform those songs as they were meant to be heard, as a collaboration between voices, between generations, between perspectives, and in doing so, we hope to honor not just Kathy's contribution to my career, but all the overlooked voices who have shaped country music from the shadows." What followed was one of those rare Nashville moments that industry veterans would discuss for years afterward. George Strait and rising star Ashley Thompson, trading verses on songs long attributed solely to him, their voices blending in a testimony to music's power to bridge time and experience. In the second row, Trevor Blackwell sat watching, having received an unexpected invitation from Ashley herself. Not a gesture of reconciliation exactly, but perhaps one of perspective, an opportunity to witness firsthand how authentic value transcends superficial judgment. As the final notes of "When Forever Ends" faded into thunderous applause, George embraced Ashley briefly before addressing the audience one more time. 47 years ago, I walked into a record label wearing the wrong clothes and speaking with the wrong accent," he said, echoing the words he had once spoken to Trevor. "I was fortunate enough to find someone who looked past those things, to hear the music underneath. Today, I'm asking all of us in this industry to do the same, to recognize that true talent often arrives in unexpected packages, and our job isn't to shape it into something familiar, but to help it find its authentic voice." The standing ovation that followed wasn't just for George Strait's legendary career or Ashley Thompson's promising future. It was an acknowledgement of a simple truth that extended far beyond music. That dignity comes not from external validation, but from the courage to remain authentic in a world that too often rewards conformity. As they took their final bow together, George whispered to Ashley, "Kathy would be proud of you. of us, Ashley corrected gently, for finally telling her story. And somewhere in a small Texas town, a retired music teacher named Catherine Mills watched the live stream of the concert, tears streaming down her face as the truth she had carried silently for decades finally found its voice through the man who had become a legend and the young woman who had reminded him of the power of authentic recognition. In that moment of public acknowledgement, three journeys intersected and found their meaning. George's journey toward completing his legacy with honesty, Ashley's journey from obscurity to purpose, and Kathy's journey from silence to recognition. Each had needed the others to become complete, and it had all begun because a country music legend had walked into a high-end boutique dressed like an ordinary rancher, creating a moment of choice between judgment and recognition, a choice that had rippled outward to change not just individual lives, but perhaps in some small way the values of an entire industry.